Well, hello guys. Hopefully everybody's having a good day. I thought I'd do a little video here. We had an unfortunate real-world accident happen here at Gillespie Field just the other day. We had a Cessna, I think it was a 182, crashed yesterday, killing both people on board. And I saw a video of it, so if you look it up, you might see the video. I'm not going to show the video here, but somebody managed to get a video. You know, they were standing on the street, and they caught the plane actually stalling out and going nose in into some sort of a little warehouse complex just to the east, or sorry, to the west of the airport. They had just taken off from Gillespie Field, and it looks like they had some sort of a engine failure. Pilot appeared to turn around and try to go back to the airport, at which point he lost control of the airplane and stalled it with like what looks like on the video just a few hundred feet above the ground. So I thought I'd at least go over what do you do when you actually lose your engine in the airplane. Now I know we're flying flight sim here, and we can take a lot more risks than you normally would in real life, but it's a good idea to at least be aware, because a lot of people start out playing, flight simulators, and they get into aviation, and they go ahead and they get their real world, pilot's license. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go over the procedures that you would do if you lose an engine on takeoff in the Piper Warrior here. We're in the Just Flight PA-28 161 Warrior 2, and we're sitting at the end of the runway here. We're not started up here, but what I'm going to show you here is I pulled up the pilot's operating handbook, and I went into the section for emergency procedures, and you can see that in the Piper here they're pretty straightforward. So engine power loss during takeoff. Right, there's not much to do here. It says if sufficient runway remains for a normal landing, land straight ahead. So if you're coasting down the runway, you just rotated, engine dies, you got a big long runway, land straight ahead. Okay, if insufficient runway remains, maintain safe airspeed. That's the most critical thing you can do in any emergency situation in an airplane, is fly the airplane first. Sometimes pilots get distracted, something goes wrong, they're trying to troubleshoot it, and they end up stalling the airplane or running into the ground somewhere. So really the first rule of thumb in all of aviation flying, whether it's a Piper or a 757 or whatever, fly the airplane first. Make sure you maintain your safe airspeed. Over here in the Piper handbook, it says make only shallow turns to avoid obstacles. Right, so this is assuming you're not going to be landing at the airport. You're going to be landing someplace else. Right, flaps as requires here for the situation, and there's only a couple little things that you can do if you try to troubleshoot it here. So basically the first thing that they're telling you is if you lose engine power on takeoff, you can't land on the runway. Basically just fly the airplane and land it someplace. That's the emergency procedure. That's the extent of it. If you've got enough altitude, there's a couple of things that they want you to do here. And we'll go over them here. So fuel selector, you'd switch tanks. Maybe as a rule of thumb, I would say just switch the tank. You're obviously running on one tank, that something's wrong. Go ahead and switch the tanks. Make sure your fuel pump is on. It should be for takeoff. Make sure your mixture is rich. It may not be for takeoff, depending on your density, altitude, or whatever. Or maybe you're at a really high airport and you leaned it out a little bit. Go ahead and enrich in a mixture. Carburetor heat on, and your primer is in and locked. Right, and if you don't regain power doing those couple little simple steps, you're going to proceed with the power off landing. And the power off landing here, if we go over power loss in flight here, let's see where it is. Okay, we go down here, we look at power off landing. Basically, you're just turning everything off. You turn the ignition off, master off, fuel selector off, and your mixture to idle cut off, and make sure your seat belts are tight. Okay, so let's jump in the airplane here. We'll take a look around. Let me get rid of the procedures here. So here we are. We're on the runway. I'm going to go ahead and just show you One little thing that I always did in my real world flying was to have a flow of what you're doing, especially in emergency procedure, and you practice this over and over and over again. And you assume every single time you're going to go flying that you're going to lose your engine. We'll touch on that in a second, but let's go back to the flow here. So flow meaning how you're doing your restart procedure here. Let's say you got up, you're at 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet. Your engine, you lose engine power. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to switch your fuel tank. You're going to make sure your primer's in. You're going to put your mixture rich. You're going to make sure your fuel pump is on, and you're going to turn your carb heat on. Now that's not exactly the sequence that they have in the handbook, but it makes sense when you're in the airplane. So it flows from left to right. So you're touching something off to the left here, then you're checking your primer here, then you're putting your mixture up, and then you're putting your fuel pump on, and then you're putting your carb heat on, right? So it's a little bit different, but it's easier to flow within the cockpit when you're actually doing it and you're stressed out and you're freaking out. And if you practice that, you kind of get like a muscle memory, so you instinctively know, you're doing this, and this, right across the cockpit. Same thing for, power off, emergency landing. You're basically just going to shut everything down. So that's pretty straightforward, and it includes, turning off the actual ignition. So let's go get ahead. What I'm going to do here is, what was I going to talk about? Oh yeah, always assume that you're going to lose your engine. So one of the things you always want to do, and I've kind of mentioned this in one of my prior videos, where I did a tour of San Diego, where I used to fly this little tour. I would take people up and fly them around San Diego for like an hour. But I always had some place that I was going to land if something went wrong. And that doesn't matter if you're, a new pilot or you've been flying for 20,000 years. You always want to be aware of that. You always want to take a look at your charts, take a look at what's around you along the route of flight, and always have sort of a, okay, at this point, if something goes wrong, I can turn here and go to this little airport, or there's a field over here that I can go to, or something like that. Now I know for a fact, because I've trained at Gillespie, that there's a golf course to the right of the airport in, I think it's Santee, which is just a little, the north side of the airport is called Santee. The airport here is actually in El Cajon, but there's a little golf course off to the side there, and I thought would kind of simulate what would happen if we lose our engine, let's say at 800 feet after takeoff, right? Which we're at, I think we'll just leave it at 300 right here. I'm not going to screw with everything here. We're just going to go, we'll climb out to 800 feet. So that's 500 feet above the ground, and we'll see if we can make that airport. Unfortunately, what happened, with the accident here the other day, the pilot lost power. I don't know what altitude he was at. I don't, he might have been higher. I don't know what the weather conditions were like. There might have been some marine layer, some clouds or something. I don't know. But he elected to try to turn around and come back to the airport. And that's sort of another thing that was always drummed into me during my flight training was almost don't ever go back to the airport, because it's probably one of the most dangerous maneuvers you can do. You've just lost your engine. You're low over the ground. You're stressing out. You're trying to figure out what's happening with the airplane. You're trying to fly the airplane, first off, right? And all of a sudden, you're going to make a 180-degree turn in an unpowered airplane that's that you're in trouble in. And that, unfortunately, is a major cause of aircraft accidents with fatalities, because you end up trying to turn around to the airport. You've got kind of get back to the airport itis in your head, and at any cost. There might have been a perfectly good golf course you could have just plopped down on straight ahead, but instead you turned around trying to get back to the airport. You end up losing control of the airplane. And unfortunately, that's kind of what happened with this incident the other day. So let's fire up the airplane here. Let's go ahead and climb out. We'll climb out to 800 feet, and then we'll kill the power and kind of demonstrate what you want to do now. Let's talk about it just a little bit before we get started up here. So best glide, I think, is about 73 knots. So we want to maintain 73 knots. Again, the first thing you're going to do is fly the airplane. Maintain 73 knots. That's your best glide. Turn towards your emergency landing spot. In our case, it's a golf course because we already know that. We've checked the charts. We've looked ahead. We know that if we take off and if we get up to 800 feet and we lose our power, we could probably make that golf course over there without too much maneuvering. So 73-ish knots, 75, we'll see how it does. This is a simulator, so it's not exactly the same, power-wise, with this airplane as the real thing. It's a little bit different, so don't hold me to 73. I'd probably maybe hold a little bit higher in this airplane. So let's get fired up over here. We'll turn everything on. We got our fuel pump on. We'll put this on. We'll get that on. On, I said. Okay, and we'll fire her up. We'll go ahead and get our, we're not even going to set the instruments. We don't need to worry about any of that. We're not going to be looking at instruments other than airspeed and our vertical speed here. So everything's going here. Let's turn on some lights. I can get that to turn on. There we go. We'll make sure Rich here. We are running. And let me see. I'll turn up the volume just a little bit so you can hear the airplane. Okay, let's go ahead and take off. Flaps are up, we're all trimmed up. We're ready for departure here. We're going to take off, climb to 800 feet, kill the engine, and try to do an emergency landing. So brakes off. I think our wind here, the wind sucks. Pretty lit. So I think the winds are really light here. Okay, so there's our 70 knots. Let's go ahead and climb out. Again, the airplane here is a little bit overpowered, so I'm going to power it back just a little bit so we get to 800 feet, pretty much down towards the end of the runway. Maintain about 80 knots, that's our climb speed here. Go ahead and trim up our rudder. And there's our 800 feet. So we just took off, and engine dies. What are we going to do? Number one, I'm going to maintain my airspeed. I'm looking at my airspeed. I see that I'm going to keep about 73 knots. Now, in the simulator here, we've got a bunch of trees in the golf course here. They're not there in real life, so disregard getting the trees. But I'm heading right for that golf course, and the golf course is right over here. Right? I'm maintaining just about 73 knots. I'm going to go 1 notch from flaps here. I've got a little bit of time here. I could try to troubleshoot, restart the engine, switch my fuel tanks, make sure my primer's in, make sure my fuel pump's on, make sure my mixture is rich. Okay, we're slowing down a little bit. We're heading for the golf course. Head right for it. Again, throttle is just powered back right here, so we're still windmilling. We're going to maintain our airspeed. There's our golf course right ahead. You can see our descent here is only about 500, 400 feet. Right, I'm going to go ahead and go another notch of flaps here. And like I said, in the simulator here, obviously all these trees aren't really here. You aim for the nice green. And there's 60 knots. Let's go ahead and prop it down here on the green. There we go. Got a pretty landing. But hey, we made it to the golf course. And we survived. Now you might have gotten banged up a little bit, but you did not turn around and you did not kill yourself, unfortunately. Or fortunately, we didn't do that here. So again, this is just a simulator, so the disclaimer, this is not any kind of instruction, it's just a little bit of hangar talk, and thought it'd be interesting, if you fly this airplane or any airplane in X-Plane, go ahead and try this, it's just a simulator, you're not going to get hurt. Go ahead and take off and take a look at a chart before you go, pick out something that, a good spot where you could possibly land. It might be a road, it might be a golf course, it might be an empty field, and practice that a couple of times. I tell you what, trying to maintain the airspeed and control of the airplane with no power is a lot different than when you do have power. So it's kind of interesting to do that. And if you ever decide to go into real world aviation, just remember that. Remember my little tips here, I guess. And hopefully you stay safe. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Till next time. Bye.